Eric, it's hard to believe, but it's been 20 years since we lost Eddie Guerrero.
Wow.
What an anniversary. You got to spend quite a bit of time with Eddie. He was in WCW from 1995 to 2000, and it was a special era in pro wrestling and Monday Night Nitro and cruiserweight history, and obviously for Eddie Guerrero as well. He made a name for himself in front of an American audience with names like Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit. And really, I think Eddie helped introduce a new style to the American television wrestling fan. You know, that fast paced, athletic, hybrid lucha libre style helped reshape, man, I guess Saturday night and Nitro and Thunder and even professional wrestling today. What do you think Eddie's legacy will be all these years later?
I think Eddie's legacy is living inside of the ring in prime time all around the world every week. You know, when you look at the impact that Eddie, not by himself, Eddie, Dean, Chris Jericho, the Luchadors, all of them, from obviously with Rey Mysterio, who is still one of the biggest stars in the industry today, and probably many ways to view that or measure that. I think I say this all the time, and every time I say it, I think I don't say it strongly enough. The cruiserweight division in WCW, it's not the idea of it, I'm not trying to put myself over, but the people that came into a high profile primetime position at one of the peaks in decades in the industry, certainly in television, beyond compare. More people watching wrestling on Monday nights than any time in history before or since, or probably forever. But the people that made that cruiserweight division so successful, each one of those wrestlers, has changed the world, the wrestling world, in the sense that the people that are watching wrestling today, I'm talking about 18, 22, 24, 26 years old, they weren't even around when Ray was really coming on strong as almost a rookie. Well, he was never a rookie. I think he started wrestling when he was 4 or something crazy like that. Some Mexican stuff. He was wrestling on the street corner when he was 5 years old or something. But you know what I mean? He started at such a young age. But back, a lot of those people weren't even alive back then. But they've become very familiar with the high-flying, fast-paced luchador influence. Obviously, it's a lot of, it's an influence. It's not a completely luchador-style presentation. But so much of the athleticism and just the visual dynamics of what takes place on the stage ring is so greatly influenced by the stuff that Chris and Eddie and Dean and Ray and so many of them did. It's actually one of the things I feel most proud of. And even though I really didn't have that much to do with it other than, cracking the door open, but I just think it's such an understated impact on the industry today. And Eddie is right there, at the top of it, looking down, smiling, because I know he agrees with me.
Do you think, I mean, listen, we all know that eventually he grew frustrated with maybe a glass ceiling, or maybe his creative, or he was hoping to move up the cards or whatever it was. But for years and years, it felt like you knew you could count on Eddie Guerrero to give a great match no matter who his opponent was. Because he could work the Rey Mysterio style. He could also have a pay-per-view match with Ric Flair and literally anything in between. Obviously, those are two all-time workers, but he could help elevate some other performers who weren't as established to that audience. I mean, just super talented. But sometimes when we hear about guys who get that reputation of being able to do that, you kind of can't help as a promoter or a booker at some point to maybe abuse them a little bit accidentally. A more common modern name that comes to mind is Dolph Ziggler. I know everyone with a microphone has said, man, this guy's criminally underrated. Maybe by an audience of one who made sure that Dolph Ziggler was the guy to help get everybody else over. Do you think if Eddie Guerrero would have hung around WCW long term, and in this alternate timeline, WCW wins the war against WWE, would he have had a glass ceiling and sort of been where he was, would he have been respectfully Dolph Ziggler, or would he have been given an opportunity to become world champion in WCW like he did in WWE and for however brief a time it was? Would that opportunity have been there eventually, do you think, in WCW, or was it just not ever going to happen?
Define eventually. I mean, it's like, I think eventually.
4 years later, he won it in 04. So,
4 years later, to be honest, no.
Okay.
I think the culture creatively, and I mean, it's almost like ideology. It's like it's a belief in something that isn't really, in this case, necessarily defined by a list of rules, but there was a general kind of consensus amongst even, disparate personalities. Like, even if you got guys that don't really get along, don't hang out, but they pretty much still agree on the basics of the industry. And at that time, there was still too many people, and I was one of them. So I'm not fading any heat here, folks. But I think the prevailing, your instinct, your gut, you don't have any piece of paper that's going to tell you you're right or you're wrong. You can't do any research. You can pretend you can, but you can't. It comes down to instinct. And sometimes your instincts are right on the money and sometimes they're not. And I think the prevailing instinct among the people in control, I'm talking about, obviously I was the president of the company, but still, let's be honest, there was people who had a lot of influence, right? Because you're managing personalities. You have to kind of, bring people into the tent, so to speak, and you compromise along the way when you do sometimes. And everybody has, and everybody always will, by the way. But at that time, that influence would have not, it would have taken them longer than 4 years to open their eyes, frankly. Mine too.
It's interesting to think about what if and what could have been. Because on some level, I almost see Eddie Guerrero, like I've heard the story, I think, of Rey Mysterio's first match in WCW. And I guess he came in with some buzz, and a lot of people were like, look at this. So they felt like, oh, this quote unquote little guy, this isn't going to work. This isn't legitimate.
Oh, yeah. I remember those conversations because I was like, are we watching the same shit?
I think when he comes through the curtain the first time and he shows off what he can do, my point is, I think looks can be deceiving, and people would take a look at a Rey Mysterio and think, I don't see him being the world heavyweight champion. And we know later we did. But I think Eddie Guerrero could kind of fall into that. I guess the reason I was asking specifically about Eddie is we know in January of 2000, it didn't last long. It lasted exactly 1 day, but they did try to put the big gold belt on Chris Benoit. And it takes until 2004 before Benoit and Eddie Guerrero both become champs in the WWF. So I thought it might be interesting to have a hypothetical discussion of, could Eddie have gotten there faster in WCW since seemingly Benoit did? Or was that more about, in your opinion, because he's not here to tell us, was that about Kevin Sullivan trying to prove a point that I'm not going to punish you? Whatever's happened in the past is water under the bridge. In fact, I'm going to let you respectfully beat a much bigger guy in Sid for the big gold belt. And that didn't quell the fears. We know the Radicals still jumped. They still went to the WWE. You weren't there at the time, but did Kevin really think that Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and these guys could have been the future at that point? Or was it more about placating unhappy talent and making them sticky to WCW?
No, I think Kevin saw it coming. And what, I was thinking, gosh, I hate to fall on that 4-year sword as badly as I did, because I'd like to think that I would have seen that train coming sooner than 4 years, but I'm sure Kevin did. Absolutely solid that Kevin did. Because here's why. First of all, because I knew Kevin pretty well, and I think I'm capable of making a pretty good guess when it comes to his creative judgment. Spent a lot of time with him. But also, I used to be in business with a guy, I'm not going to drop names, but massive success in the entertainment business as as an executive. And he always used to tell me, Eric, bet on greed. When you're forced to make a decision and try to make a judgment, and you're kind of looking at who's doing what and why, look for the greed. And when you find the greed, you'll know what your next move is. And Kevin, he was a smaller guy. He was one of them. I think I don't want to say greedy. It's not why I was tying that in. But deep down inside, I think Kevin, more than anything, wanted to prove that you don't have to be 6'6" and 280 to be a star. Because that's what he struggled with his whole life, professional life. I think that probably had more to do with it than anything. That's my guess.
I'll be honest. We've talked about this a lot before, but never did I ever imagine that the reason Kevin was pushing Chris Benoit was less about, I want to prove to you to demonstrate to you that I'm committed to you and that I'm going to position you, with real opportunity. I'm going to put the big belt on you. I'm going to put the big gold belt on you. You're going to beat the nearly 7 foot Psycho Sid. But no, it was really rooted in, hey, he's the best. He's great. He deserves it. And I want to afford him opportunities that I didn't receive based on a preconceived notion that's just a fallacy. People will believe it when they see it.
And that's, that's kind of like trying to, ascribe certain, psychological, insight into something that may have been both things. It may have been, part of it may have been because Kevin saw it, because he wanted to prove it. They're not like separate things, right?
Right.
It could be more than one reason. But if you look at it from Kevin's perspective, he did see value in those guys. He pushed a lot of people that were in that category of smaller but faster, more dynamic people. He loved the ECW influence, right? So Kevin was wanted in part to prove that you don't have to be 6'8" and 300 pounds, because those people are hard to find. If you're a booker and your job is to create content 52 weeks a year, whatever, 300 hours a year, whatever you're doing, you need talent. And there's just not enough big 6 foot. I'm talking now as a producer, not as a wrestling fan, not as a booker. As a booker, because as a writer, that's what a booker is really. As a writer, you are part of the production team. They can't produce what you don't write, and vice versa. So I can understand why, just from a resource point of view, you'd want to take the emphasis off big guys and put it on small guys. You got more to work with, and they're more fun to watch in some respects. It's why I wanted the cruiserweight division, because we had a lot of big guys, but the pace in a big guy match is kind of always the same. The moves are different. Well, not really that much. It's just the order in which they come at you. But the pace, the presentation, the psychology of the match is very, very cookie cutter. With the cruiserweights, and the style, it was so fast paced and so different that it always felt fresh. Sorry, I can't stop talking about the cruiserweight division. I'm sorry, you got us off track.
All right, real quick, I want to remind everybody, especially this time of year, did you know at SaveWithConrad.com you can skip your next 2 house payments? That's right. You'll get a cheaper monthly payment and no payments until next year. How about a little Christmas vacation from house payments? That's right. No payments in November or December at SaveWithConrad.com.